representing helping people. And it's not any sort of Microsoft hiring event or anything like that. This is just my joy in giving back to the community after struggling through a lot of closing an employment gap. And yeah, a lot of the audience that's been coming are job seekers or career pivoters. And I love to help people. And then I find people who also love to help people, and that's all very exciting. So feel free at any point to put questions in chat if you want to, and your LinkedIn profiles. I love to make sure we are all connected by the end of the call so that that you can grow your network and support each other's content. And with that, I will say, let's get started. If you don't know me, I'm Jacqueline Wittes, and I did overcome a really long employment gap, almost 20 years full-time. So my profile looks like I did a lot because I was doing a lot. It just wasn't full-time paid employment. So once I secured a role, I started asking, how can I give back? And this was one of those brilliant ideas where I said, let's see what happens. So thank you for joining my experiment. And so far it's going well, and I'm going to keep doing it as long as people keep showing up. So with that, I'm going to introduce Tim. I meant to ask how you pronounce your last name, but I will give it a shot. Dubinsky?
Dubinsky, very close.
All right. Then he actually saw my SOS call this week on LinkedIn of my previous guest couldn't make it. And he said, you know what, I'll join. Hopped on a call, got to know each other for a few minutes, and here he is. And as I mentioned before, he's actually in the process of transitioning from the military himself, but he mentioned he's just getting a lot of success with getting informational interviews. And sometimes when you're trying to network, you get a lot of crickets and it's frustrating. You think nobody's listening, and you're like, how do I get anybody to just respond? So I thought he could offer us some amazing insight. So Tim, if you wanted to just give a little introduction of yourself and let's get to know you, and then we'll get started here.
All right. So first, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm getting ready to transition. I've been in the Ohio Army National Guard for 24 years and joined when I was 17 and been full-time. It's something that's been great. And over my career, I've been a jack of all trades. So that plays into part of the story and how that affects how informational interviews played a big part in my transition process. So I picked when I was leaving my organization. So I thought a lot about retirement, and I spent about 18 months contemplating what I wanted to do, if I wanted to stay in, if I wanted to get out. I talked to some people who were senior to me who had recently gotten out and asked them questions about, did they regret getting out? What did they do? How did they go through the process? And really trying to take full advantage of that to make sure that I made the right decision. I think sometimes when you jump, having a little bit more confidence because you can't get back in the plane, right, is, once you make that jump. So I made that decision. I was very firm and I was very happy with that thought, first of all. And then I also had about 16 to 18 months from the time I was actually retiring. So I had a long timeline that I had put in place. So it wasn't something that was thrown on me. And I think that's a really big deal because when you're planning for something opposed to when something's thrust upon you, the rules are different. So those are big things. I really think that transition is a lot like doing a career pivot because I am doing a career pivot. So we can call it transition. We can call it all these things. It's not really in many ways different than graduating college, I think, because you're going from an environment you're used to a new area, trying to find employment, to an environment that you're not used to. So I think it's really relatable, whether you're retiring from the military, whether you're doing a career pivot, or whether you're graduating college and you're trying to do the same thing. The goals are all essentially the same. So as I said, I was kind of a jack of all trades. I had been in recruiting. I had been in intelligence. I had been in logistics. I had been in air defense. I had done operations, in many different leadership capacities as a commander. So you throw all those things together and it's, well, Tim, what do you want to do? That was a really, really tough question. And I spent a solid 6 to 12 months just trying to figure that out. And again, there's a lot of people that, I'm getting ready to turn 42, and we're still trying to figure out what we want to do when we grow up, right? So again, I think that's a big part of where informational interviews really come into play. So when you were talking about how informational interviews have played a role in my path, trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do, I started reaching out to everybody because I didn't know. At first I was like, well, I want to go take care of people. I want to be a leader. But, as you start looking around, I'm here in the Columbus area. As you start looking around, there's no advertisement board that says, hey, we're looking for leaders. Yeah, then that might be part of the role. But that's not a job title. So what do you want to lead? What do you want to do? What industry? What organization? So I just started talking to a lot of people who were prior service military at first and trying to figure out what they did, what they liked about it, the organizations they were part of. And that really kind of set the basis because it was a lot of great feedback on them telling me where they had failed and helped me hopefully bypass some of those failures and streamline my process to make it less painful. So that's kind of where I jumped in, all in, I should say, on doing informational interviews.
That's awesome. And I can relate so much. And also Anthony Garcia, our co-host, I know he talked to a ton of people in his journey from transitioning out of the military as well. So, and I kind of say it's like I was afraid to declare a major, so to speak, when I was job searching because there were a lot of things that looked interesting and and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do either. And I thought if I picked one, then I would alienate myself from everything else. But then you end up kind of lost a little bit. So I love that concept. I wish I would have done more informational interviews just on what does this job look like day to day and what how does that play out? So you kind of alluded to it a little bit that you were looking for people who were prior military or had transitioned from as themselves, but how did you find the right people to reach out to? Did you do it specifically LinkedIn or other types of?
Well, so you said something that really spurred a thought for me. I had met with one of my friends here who is a senior level IT recruiter HR guy. And then obviously you always want to utilize the network that you already have. And so as I sat down with him and I talked about kind of my timeline and what I was looking for, and I thought I wanted something in the program management or project management field, he said, hey, Tim, I went over your resume, and like I talked about earlier, you've done HR, you've done operations, you've done these different things. I see your resume, and I don't know what you want to do. He's like, what are you asking? What are you looking for? Because there's not really any direction. It's all over the place. I was like, well, that was my career. I was all over the place. So, what he gave me some really good advice, which I didn't want to pigeonhole myself, which was what you were talking about and made me think of this. He said, you really need to take your resume and of course you tailor it to every job opening with every organization that you're applying to, but you need to have a logistics resume. You need to have a operations resume, and you need to have an HR resume, and really like take out all that stuff that is not applicable to what you're going towards. And that really helped me. And then the next thing that we talked about was industries. Here in Columbus, Columbus is a growing city. I have a wife who works. I have kids that are planted in the schools. I don't want to move from the Columbus area. Like I know a lot of other people looking for jobs don't want to either. So as I was looking at program management or project management, I wanted to also look at the industries because I wanted to start my focus on industries where there was more opportunity in the Columbus area. Because if there's a horrible stat that's something like 50% of veterans, their job doesn't work out in the first year. And a lot of that is on the veteran and their ability to cope with the situation they're in. And the transition process and all the turmoil that goes with it. And I think it's something like 70% over 24 months. And those are super high. And so one, I wanted to make sure that I got the right organization, but I also got the right industry. And that would help drive my search for who I wanted to talk to. And in the Columbus area, I was looking at organizations like Chase and some other financial and insurance industry or organizations here, and I thought that would be a better option for me. And the logistics community is really large here, opposed to some of the other industries where, if you move, it might be harder to jump industries, even if you're in program or project management. So that drove some of it. I used the network that I currently had existing to start there. I also was able to start on LinkedIn a lot earlier than many people who are looking for jobs. Like I said, I knew I was contemplating 18 months before I submitted my request to retire that I was going to leave. So therefore, I knew that network was going to be important. And then that last year, as I really started, ramping up my efforts, really building just a broad scope of people in multiple industries at multiple levels that, I found their content to be interesting. I thought they were organizations that I could see myself working for. So there was a lot of different things that I started building the base blocks for what I would ultimately go and talk to these people. So obviously the best is if you can get a warm handoff from a friend or a professional contact, especially if someone that you've worked with that can speak on your credentials and your ability on a professional level, that's a home run right there. So if you can start there, that's where you start. I ran onto those people. So what I started doing is saying, hey, I like these companies. I want to do these type of jobs. And so I started reaching out to people on LinkedIn. And I would absolutely say every time you reach out to anyone, whether it's via email, through their website, through LinkedIn, that personalization of, hey, I was looking at your stuff on LinkedIn. You do what I want to do, or, ultimately one day I want to be like you. There's nothing wrong with telling people that they're great and they have the resume that you hope to have, or they work at the organization that is your hopes and dreams. And you say, hey, would you be willing to give me a little bit of your time and tell me about you? Everybody loves talking about themselves, right? So have them talk to you about them. Even if you don't get to tell your side of the story, you're still winning because they met you, you learned something about them, you learned about an organization, and that's someone you can go back to.
I love that. I was actually on a call earlier this week with the women in gaming, and they kind of said the same thing. Networking is not about you, it's about the other person. And to keep that in mind. So I really love that you brought up that point. I would like to see, I know Anthony had a lot of similar, like he probably has a lot of insights on this same journey and talking to people, because I know you were like numbers. Yeah, would you like to chime in for a second here on this?
Yeah, I think when I came out, though, I took a different approach in that I didn't know there were resources. So I was just going to do it myself, because clearly I'm smart enough. I should be able to figure all this out. Overconfidence maybe a little bit. And I did the same thing you said, Tim. I was looking for that leader role. I was a captain in the Army. Of course, when they come out and be a manager, that makes all sense. But I talked to a gentleman who was part of American Corporate Partners. American Corporate Partners is a nonprofit that connects veterans with Fortune 100 executives around the country. And within 5 minutes of talking to this gentleman, he was like, your resume is terrible. Stop applying to portals. Go talk to people. And he was just so direct to me. And I was like, I like this. Tell me why. He's like, I don't know anything. He's like, you're the longest resume in the world. You're only 30 years old. You shouldn't have a 3-page resume. And it just narrowed me down right away and taught me something, in that I was applying to portals. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. I thought you're supposed to go to their website, choose a job, and apply. And so I did it 1,000 times. And but it takes someone to say, look, man, I post jobs all the time. That's not how I find people. I work with my referrals primarily. I love a referral. Like, I love some connection to the person. And I think from there on out, I realized I needed to start talking to people, like individually, being part of events, being part of communities. And that's when I did what you did, Tim. I started talking to my peers. Who went to my university? All right. I tried to find a connection with something that had something in connection with me. If you weren't in the military, then I needed to find that you were the same university I went to, University of Texas, San Antonio. Maybe you were also an econ major. Okay, let me try to find something we have in common. and then just ask a question. Can I talk with you about maybe just like your career path or your opinion on these things? And I find most people, if they're not a recruiter and they're not used to getting tons of messages, when someone messes them out of the blue with genuine interest and curiosity of what they do, you take the call. I mean, I still do it right now. If someone messages me and just asks me questions around that, I'm gonna go and talk for an hour.
And Victoria, I see your hand up. I'll pivot to you. There was a question in chat real quick, if that's all right. It's let's see. They saw that I had a 20-year gap, and often I get the question, what do I do now? Well, one of the questions is, like, you're asking, should I say nothing if I'm not working in the same field I'm applying to? Absolutely not, unless you're actually doing nothing. And I'm going to say, like, if you're truly watching Netflix all day, you're going to struggle a lot more getting any kind of interviews or informationals or anything. But if you are volunteering, or you like, most people do things throughout the day, so you need to kind of look at what are you doing now, and whether it's volunteer activities, if it's any kind of side job, any kind of, like, are you consistently posting on social media and you want to go into social media marketing? Are you taking courses online that are teaching you some of the skills? Like, those are the things that you kind of have to learn how to put. And I say this every single mentorship live thing because I believe in it so much. Inventory what you're doing, even if it's just like planning for groceries for the week. Put that in there, because that is asset management and ultimately project management. You are doing something that is valuable throughout your day. So inventory the whole thing, and then Google resume power words and find out which ones apply to those things that you're doing. It can start shaping the leadership, the project management, program management. If you don't know the difference between those, start looking those up. Each company kind of looks at them different, so it's a little bit of a weird thing to start digging into, but that'd be a great thing to ask on informational interviews is, I see you're a product manager. Do you have time to just explain what is the difference between product and project? Something like that. So you can find those pieces. Happy to also connect outside of this meeting and answer that a little bit more in depth. And I don't have a meeting right behind this, so I can stay behind if you have any a little bit later, if you can want to explore that more in depth. But Victoria, I do want to get to your question since your hand's up. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tim and Jacqueline. I really enjoyed learning from your experiences. I'm also doing a lot of informational interviews, and my question is, do you have any advice on how to maintain those relationships once you've had an interview? And another question is, have you seen perhaps a higher response rate from people maybe with certain roles or levels in their careers? Just curious.
So keeping up with people is difficult, right? So it's I would compare it to the recruiting world, right? So it's hard to keep the funnel full and run things through completion, right? So those things are tough because they're two ends of the spectrum, and how do you keep both going effectively? A couple of ways that I've done it is just, I've done where I've just gone back through some of my messages and re-engaged people, or I'll go back and, again, a lot of my contacts, because I think a lot of people, sometimes we still stick to this very local mentality where I talk to people all over. So it doesn't matter if you're in California or Texas, and I don't want to go to California or Texas for a job. Even if it's not in a remote capacity, you still have all sorts of great things that I can learn from your organization, your position, your experience. And you might never be a person I talk to as a hiring manager, and that's okay. So I engage a lot of people on LinkedIn, and then just, going to their page, commenting on their content. That way, like, they've seen me interact with them, and it's not in a needy way. Because that's one of the other things that I wanted to get to a little bit. Right now, for the informational interview, this is probably maybe as good of a time as any to be doing informational interviews. And I say that because hiring managers need us more than they have for a long time. So, the ball is in our court, and we've got to run with it. So I say that because in some other cases, hiring managers might be a lot less willing to talk to people compared to now when they have open roles, and you just might be that unicorn that they're looking for, and they're willing to give 15 minutes of their time, where if they didn't have openings, yeah, they might not be as willing to do so. So I think that we have a lot of opportunity as job seekers right now. But the other part is we don't want to be needy, and we don't want to feel desperate. So, sales or recruiting, if you're a desperate sales or recruiter, salesman or recruiter, you're losing, because it's just the feeling that comes across. So I would just say, natural engagements every so often. And then, like I said, it's harder for me because I started this process 12 months ago, where I was engaging people a lot more. And I know I don't want to start working until the August timeframe. So that's a long time to kind of string stuff along, and have meaningful engagements. I don't know. Hopefully that helps.
This is super helpful. Thank you.
And I love the, oh, go ahead, Anthony, please. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just want to comment on that. One of the things I get to do in my job is recruit veterans for roles all across the country. And it's been different because I get to see the style in which veterans keep up with me. And some people are, I didn't give them this advice, so I get to experience what advice they may have gotten along their way. And this one gentleman in North Carolina that I'm trying to place with a group, we've been in communication for like 4 or 5 months as he was getting out of the Navy and now, and he sends me a message almost every other week. And it's like, hey, Anthony, hope you're doing great. It's wonderful and sunny here in South Carolina. Just want to see if there's any news or anything, you might have seen out in the horizon for me. Hope you're doing good. And he doesn't ask for much out of it. And I always feel guilty if I don't get back to him. But if someone were to, message me, and that light of a touch point is enough. Because as soon as the role comes across, I do 2 things. I go to my LinkedIn and I go search by location. So if I need someone in North Carolina, in Florida, or South Dakota, or wherever, I immediately go to my LinkedIn, because that's easy for me, in that, well, I've already established some type of connection. So if I message you, I don't have to first send a connection request to say, hey, I'm Anthony, I'm looking to hire veterans. Now we're already connected. So I'm going to ask you right away, hey, would you be interested in this role? Like, I don't have to go the formalities because we already connected. And if I don't find anyone on my LinkedIn, then I go through, I have another database that I go and search through. And then if that doesn't work out, like, who's been messaging me? Like, who's top of mind? And it's a delicate thing, but it's not that challenging. Just a simple, hey, how you doing? Hope you're doing great. Just want you to know I'm still looking for a role, and I'd be a great candidate. That's it.
So if you don't mind, I want to piggyback on that for one thing. So I was talking to someone the other day. I'm all about process improvement and professional development and getting better myself. And so I was talking to a gentleman who, is smarter than me about LinkedIn. He reached out to me and asked me, hey, you got some time that we can get together and talk? And I said, absolutely. So we were talking through some stuff, and one of the things that came open was the open to work banner that LinkedIn has. And there's a lot of different feelings and insights on whether or not you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I'm not here to tell you I know better than anyone else. But one of the things that he said was a really good way for me to look at things. If you're new to the networking game and you throw up the open to work banner, and you haven't really established much of a network, some people, especially if they're more established, might feel like, well, of course you're reaching out to me. You need something from me. Whereas if you have spent more time and you have a longer timeline and you don't need something right away, or you're networking while you don't need it, then, when you throw up that open to work and you reach out to someone that you've already reached out to, like, oh yeah, I know Tim, we talked once upon a time, and now it doesn't feel like a transactional relationship. It just feels natural.
I like that. And I love the idea of the long game. And when you're talking about, like, maybe one of the things that came to mind, and I'm just kind of looking at it from the empathy perspective, and my own LinkedIn inbox, is the more followers somebody has, or the more they just might have a really full inbox too. So do be cognizant of the ask, and definitely don't lead with it like, hi. There are many times when someone will send a very nice, thoughtful note to me. And then as soon as I accept the request, they'll send me a resume and say, do you have any jobs for me? And I'm like, that's not exactly, it's, it's the equivalent of being in the grocery store and somebody hands you a business card and then walks away. And you're like, here, find something for me. Find the flower for me. And I'm like, what? Like, there's signs. Go read. Like, if you need help moving this flower from that shelf to that shelf, happy to help. But like, find the flower first, kind of thing. So, and it goes with job asks as well. Like, what? Be specific. Sometimes the ask for 15. If I responded to every 15-minute request, I would never get my actual day job done. So, but I will tell you, there are people who message me, they interact with my post regularly, and their name is kind of always top of mind. And if then they message me with an ask, you're probably going to get that 15 minutes of time because we've established a longer standing relationship. So I love the long game points in this whole conversation. So on a very practical level, is there wording that you feel like that kind of like a style of reach out or connection request that seems to work better? 'Cause, I mean, I have so many trials and errors on how to do this, but I would love to hear somebody else's perspective.
So my thought's always been, culture is really big in the organization I come from, and so therefore, I think one of the things that we generally probably do a bad job at is really understanding the cultures that we're going to. So if you don't know where you're going to, what the culture is when you get there, and whether or not that fits you, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. And so how I think that relates to this question is what are you like? What is your style? And if you're reaching out to people and it doesn't feel natural to whatever your style is, then that might not be the right fit to be at the very beginning. That might, when you connect with that hiring manager, if your style, if your personalities, if your way of interacting in business is not similar, then they might not be the right person to really get you where you want to be anyway. So I would always say you've got to be genuine in whatever is you, because what works for me is very likely not to work, perfectly for you. But again, I said I do a lot of these almost, kind of cold call based off of, interactions on LinkedIn. And so I would just say, hey, I'm looking to transition from the military. I'm looking in, getting into this field, or I'm looking at this company. I see that you do this thing, or you are at this company. And, I was wondering if you would be open to, if they're local. I always prefer grabbing coffee. That's my thing. I'm an extrovert. I like face-to-face interaction. I like handshakes. To me, that's much better. Not that it's not great being here on Teams, but it's just not the same to me. So if obviously, location doesn't allow that, or their schedule doesn't allow that, and let's face it, not everybody's like, hey, I just met you. I don't want to meet some weird guy for coffee that, even in a public place, because I don't know you yet, right? And so that's okay too. And so I always kind of throw it out like, hey, I'd love to meet for coffee if that works. If not, and if that doesn't work with your schedule, a Zoom call or a phone call would be great. And just kind of leave it at that, and throw the ball back over in their court. Let them pick what's comfortable for them. Don't, again, make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. Tell them you want to talk about them. Go in with zero expectations. I've never once in any of the 90 plus informational interviews I've done, never once sent them my resume. So unless if they come and look at my LinkedIn profile, that's how they know anything before our conversation about me. And even afterwards, unless if they specifically ask, I'm not following up with theirs. Hey, thanks for talking to me the other day about what you do, or here's my resume. If you ever have a job that comes open, I'm not saying, to me, that's still premature in the process, because again, I'm a little bit more in the long game. I want to set something up to where when I have a real need, I want to follow back up with them and say, hey, we talked about this. I ended up seeing this thing. And I don't know if you have someone you could connect me to, or if you could tell me about this role or this department in this company.
Right. We do have a question here on non-traditional education routes. So April has courses from or certifications from Coursera, but not an actual degree. So do you have any suggestions on how to assure hiring managers that she's not going to waste their time just to get an informational interview out of them?
The degree is an interesting thing because I'd say when I was at Oracle, my boss didn't have a degree and some of my peers didn't have degrees. And he was my boss and I have a degree, you know, so I don't think it plays as much a role as you think. But without experience, I don't think much of degrees. I'm gonna be honest. I really don't even know that I even look at your degree if you send me a resume. I need to look at what you did before, and I don't even know that I look at education. It's just not applicable to what we're doing. That's my opinion. I build stuff, and I am in technology from the infrastructure side. So we deal a lot with engineers, architects, people with degrees, and vast majority of us don't really use them.
I saw a stat the other day that's something like the number of positions that we're hiring that required a resume is down like 30%. I can't remember the years to present, and I think a lot less positions are requiring it. Now, I don't know if that's fully because some of it is just assumed in some positions, so that's kind of tricky. But the other part is I think the burden just becomes a little bit higher on how do you articulate that you bring value and you have those skills to that company, because you don't have that one line that says, bachelor's degree in this or a master's degree in that. So, what certificate makes you amazing, or what skill do you have that, they can't get somewhere else, and the degree doesn't matter?
And if you are in the job like search right now and you have certificates that again, it piggybacks on this idea of what have you done. If there's somewhere that you can volunteer, or if you're looking for coding or something like that, get on a GitHub repository and start contributing to someone else's project, because whatever you can do to get practical experience in that field that you can then put on your resume, that I'm pretty sure, and from what I hear over and over again, what you've done is far more important than the piece of paper. And there's even a trend to that I'm seeing moving away from that need for it with some of the birth of boot camps for tech and things like that. Or, I guess in the ultimately I'm saying, like, don't let that not having the degree influence you to the point where you think, wow, like, because sometimes for me, it was like all I ever saw was the career gap. And it took a while for me to embrace what I did in all those years. And I would let the career gap get in the way more than it needed to get in the way. And that was my own internal dialogue. So try and switch the dialogue and then start looking for practical ways that you can apply what you've learned to work for someone doing something. Even somebody like me, it's like my website doesn't look great. If somebody was like, you know what, I'll make your website look great for you, because I just need to volunteer time to do this, I'd be like, really? You're going to do that for me, for little old me? Because I just have a day job. So it's really hard for me to be like, is my design well? I don't know. There's a widget, I add it. So but someone that really knows WordPress and web design around WordPress could make it magical, right? So look for opportunities like that, and then you build that whole.
And unless it's a technical degree, like, so if you're pursuing things in data center site selection, they're going to want you to have a law degree. Even though you're not necessarily doing anything legal, you need to be reviewing contracts to a degree in which they only have confidence letting someone with a JD do. But unless it's calling out for that technical degree, I wouldn't harp on it. Something that you did on Coursera that specifically applied to the job would probably highlight you more than having a bachelor's in business administration.
Right. We do have one question about translating military stuff into resumes for civilian hiring managers, and into resume information civilian hiring managers will understand and prompt a conversation. There are a lot of resources on just that question alone. But it goes back to the pivot piece, right? Like, if you're pivoting, how does anything that you did previously translate into what you want to do now? So Anthony, Tim, do either one of you, or if anybody's pivoted
I
successfully?
think one thing that this is a hard challenge for veterans. If you civilianize it too much, no one knows what you're saying, because you've just generalized everything about what you did, in which you're like, I'm a project manager and I did these general things. It's like, okay, but what was your job? Like, what were you a part of? And so when you sanitize it, when you try to just go too far with it, remove acronyms, remove unit numbering sequences, but still say, I was an infantryman charged with, leading 38 folks. We focus on all kinds of things. Let us know what you did. Some aren't going to understand it, but if you try to sanitize it to nothing, it'll go nowhere. And it's a hard balance with that, but you got to be descriptive. And again, acronyms, you got to lose them. Specific military jargon, you have to lose it, but be descriptive of what you did in the military. Tim, you might have some new comments since you're in the job market more recently with translating your background.
Well, so again, I think it depends, as Jacqueline said, are you doing a career pivot? Were you a networking specialist or a communication specialist? If you're a tank driver, there's not a lot of people looking for tank drivers out there. So, but what soft skills, what leadership skills, what processes did maybe you use, or what metrics as a, whether or not you were a platoon sergeant or a commander, it doesn't matter at what did you own and how did you make it better? And then what are those other soft skills that, you might lack a hard skill in a career pivot, but how does that soft skill that you have in leadership, in mentorship, in, professional development of others, what are those things that you're great at that you can really hang your hat on? And I think that's a key part of, that kind of looking inward, self-reflection, and then, trying to get that on paper.
I really love some of these resources that are popping in chat here. Developforgood.org and catchafire.org look like places you can practice coding. Jesse says you can offer to build software for local companies, ask friends, family if they need software. Even like networking or any of those pieces, somebody probably has a home network problem that you can go solve, and every one of those is experience. So of course I'm in tech, so these tend to be catered a little bit more towards the technology world, but the same thing can be said for everybody needs a manager in their life somewhere. So like you can help someone out and really work on that. So let's see.
See, April has another comment about Google certifications. I'll tell you just a little bit. I use Google's platform as one of my job boards, and I post jobs there in 4 different cities right now. And I have not had a lot of success, and I'll just be candid in that I'll receive someone who's done a Google project management certificate, and their past 6 years has been at Whole Foods working in different capacities, and now they're trying to go directly into project management. I think the best route, if you're going to go pursue a project management certificate or data analytics certificate, what's the role underneath the project manager? So come in and say, I want to be the assistant project manager. I want to be the project coordinator, because now that you have project management certificates, like, oh, this is someone who's super ambitious and they're trying to get in the door. But if you try to compete head to head with project managers who are in that industry, all I'm going to see is Whole Foods. And I'm not going to see, I'm like, this person doesn't realize that they don't have the same background as someone in this role. But again, you come in at that assistant level, a lot of it goes away for us. So that's my view on pursuing those types of certificates. It's not a 1-for-1 for experience.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember having a different guest talking about sometimes to pivot, you need to take a step back. Actually, last week they were even talking about it, take a little bit of a step back, but then it may be the perfect entry point for you, but if you start exceeding all of those expectations, you're not going to stay in that assistant role for long. You will be able to promote and move quickly until you kind of match where you're actually supposed to be. And you'll kind of know as soon as you start feeling stretched almost every day in your job, you're probably like, this is exactly where I probably should be now. And until I grow and it starts to get a little more mundane and the growth kind of slows down some in it. Make sure there are no
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I've seen it firsthand in Oracle. I was fortunate to pivot into tech into a more senior role, but many of my peers were 2 levels below in program management terms. And now they're all senior managers. So I've left in that world and I've consistently see them far surpass anything I've done in the old organizations. And they didn't come in at the senior level. They came in as one step above entry level program manager. And it was through their experience, because they were way overqualified, if you're considering what their background was. But they came in, they had no problems. They know how to network, they know how to find the next team. And before you know it, again, they're principals, they're senior managers, and they're just, no one would ever have known they came in at such a low level.
Right. So my next question, let's go on a really practical side, and like maybe everybody wants to pull out pen and paper and like, what do you have specific questions that you ask, or if there are hiring managers here, have you ever had any specific questions that you were asked that really made you say, wow, this person is really thoughtful, and just something that kind of made a little bit of magic happen on those?
So,
Like for me, one of them that I remember asking is, how does your team prioritize? And you can fill in the blank with whatever is important to you. And that was one of the most insightful questions I've ever asked to someone. And I found out I've got a lot of red flags from that answer. I was like, oh, okay, I don't think I want to be here. So I'm looking for those kind of things where like
well, I think part of it starts with where are you with that industry or that organization? So I'll use a perfect example here. Again, Chase is a large employer here in the Columbus area. I think they've got 12,000 people that work here. And so that's one of the targeted organizations I've gone through. And I started with some of my network who work there, and I spoke to them first and then asked for referrals from them or people they thought I should talk to. So a couple of things I always do. I always ask them to tell me about themselves, right? So again, that's usually an easy way to get them talking, to get the conversation started. I always ask them, what got them there to that company or that position, because there had to be something that brought them there, and hopefully it wasn't because they couldn't find something else, right? So what is it that brought them there? And then especially for someone who's been there longer, what keeps them there? So Jacqueline, you've been at Microsoft for almost 4 years now. What keeps you at Microsoft? Why don't you go to Google? Why don't you go here? Why don't you do that? What is it great about your organization? What makes you happy? Is it because these are culture questions. From there, the next things that come up are, what do you like about the organization you're part of, or what do you like about the position you're doing with X company? So those are always really important to me. I think the other thing that was really important to me also is understanding, you said before, when you talk about different organizations, different industries, they call the same jobs different things. In companies within the same organization, I've talked to a lot of banks, so I've talked to USAA and Wells Fargo. In their jobs, their titles are very different than Chase's. So when you go to a company, does the job you think that you're looking at, do they do what you think they do? And then also at the level, I always tried to glean from them what towards the end of the conversation, what level of that organization do they think would be appropriate for me to come into? To go to, Anthony's question or his statement of like maybe taking a step back, talk to someone who's in a role. I talk to people above where I planned on coming in as hopeful hiring managers. I talk to people who were peers to the position that I hope to come into to see what they do and like how I felt I could compete against that group. And then I actually talked to people in positions that were in the organization that either I was pretty sure I didn't want to go into those roles, or they would be in positions potentially lower than where I hoped to go, because I wanted to hear that bottom-up perspective of what the organization is like. Because if you talk to the people at the top of most organizations, they're not going to tell you if things are not going well. So they're going to be like, yeah, I'm a senior VP here. This place is awesome. I love it. And everybody below them will tell you how horrible it is and how toxic the leadership there is. So, are you looking at all the different echelons of the organization to find out what it actually looks like on the inside. So those are some things that I like to talk about. I think a big part of going into those is it's almost like a date, right? So you go into this thing, you don't know them, you're trying to establish some rapport, you're trying to get them to do the talking, you want to learn from them, you don't want to make it awkward. So how do you get this conversation rolling without it being super awkward? So you have to like look at those pauses and have questions ready and available that if they just say, hey, like I'm here, I've had a couple where, you show up and they don't, it's like you really got to, poke and prod to get them to give information. So, it's almost like you're interviewing them to get the information you're looking for. Technically, I was just on a call yesterday where, someone didn't show up on time and I was calling in to help them. So, whether you're doing, most of these are happening on Zoom or Teams or whatever the case may be, because if you're calling someone to ask for help and you don't turn your camera on, or you're late, or you had technical issues and you never got the Zoom invite and you never reached out beforehand to say, hey, like I never got the link that you said you were going to give me. Like being ready, just like you would for an interview, is really, really important. So those are things, and then always be prepared to talk about yourself. So I go into the informational interview not planning to talk about Tim Davinsky, to hear about them, to hear about the organization, ask questions. I find that usually people are amazingly candid on these conversations, like almost surprisingly candid, that a lot of times people I don't know, they'll talk about what levels they think you should go in. They will tell you good and bad things about the organization, brutally honest. They will tell you about pay structure, rank structure. I mean, you can learn all these different things. You've just got to ask and do it in a way that, doesn't sound like you're trying to, to use and never talk to them again. If you're doing it in a building a relationship fashion.
I really loved the question on what level of the organization would I be right in for this. That's because even with like Microsoft, when you're looking at job postings, you'll see program manager 2, senior program manager, various things. And it's like, well, if you're trying to figure out what level are you interviewing for, it's possible that answer is you just need to talk to somebody internal and say, I'm seeing a senior position. What's expected of a senior level person in this role? So I loved that point a lot.
So that's tricky. Just one thing to keep in mind, just like resume advice, everybody's got different advice. So, take what works for you and throw the rest out. I would say the same thing is true. I've talked to a lot of people at different levels, and you talk to some people and they're, everybody's looking at you and comparing you to them. And they say, I think of course you should start at or below where I'm at. So this is what I would expect. Or, I've talked to people at executive levels and they said, with all your experience, you've got an MBA, you've got a green belt, you're getting ready to work on your PMP. I think you could come in at this level, and you got to be careful of that too, because even though you might have some leadership experience, management experience, you don't have that industry knowledge. And you don't want to jump into a spot and then be unsuccessful because, that didn't match up either.
I really like that. I love it. Anthony, did you have any questions that you would recommend anybody ask?
Definitely come with questions. Tim's absolutely right. Like, don't be prepared to talk about yourself. But when someone's like, tell you about yourself, I have my spiel in which I'll kind of glaze over most of my experience depending on who I'm talking to. Maybe I'm only going to talk about certain things, but I'm used to being asked that question. But I think if you come in there and you're prepared of, well, where are your new markets? Where do you plan to grow at? Where do you see challenges in the next year in your business? What are some of the pain points you experience throughout? Do you have problems with delivery? Do you have problems with closeout? Is there a technical understanding within some of the people you hire? Like, constantly asking, like, what are the problems? But in the more in-depth or precise the question is related to what they're doing, it stands out. And that's one of my, I haven't looked for a job in a while, but before that was my going into every single interview. Like after I established myself professionally, it became a different interview because I'm interviewing them now because I don't know if I want to leave my company. I have a good thing going on now and I'm a good pay and all these other things. So your confidence changes when you go into this. And when I was going in there and I needed the job, I didn't ever ask those questions because I just didn't know to ask them. And it's only that I'm more experienced now that I go in there. It's like, no, you need to answer this because I've got to make my decision based on some of the things you're going to tell me. And if you have no growth or you don't plan to expand outside the US with your product, I'm actually not that interested in working with you. I like global programs. So take the same mindset in that, go find good information because you're most likely not going to get the first job. You know, you're going to talk to a number of people. So go and find out those great things. And I'll put one asterisk into this whole equation when we're going and you're trying to evaluate an employer. If you go pursue the safest opportunity, you're not going to get some of the hardest challenges that will push you to the most growth you've ever had. The people who did not believe in me in my career are the reasons I have been so successful. Because when you're trying to prove someone wrong, your motivation to learn and grow to the roof. Like proving that person wrong becomes like, I'm going to stay up at night. I'm going to get certifications on the weekend. I am not going to be put in that box versus, hey, you're doing a great job. Keep doing it. Like, what's your incentive to go be pushed? So don't be afraid of a situation that is not necessarily toxic, but challenging, disorganized, and needs work. Because when you walk into an environment and everything's been figured out, where's your advantage? My advantage has always been, and I've only been a part of startups. Corporate startups, construction startups, Google Fiber was a startup. That whole organization lacked processes. They didn't even have a way to do your expenses. So going in with just a little bit of knowledge made the world of a difference. Oracle Cloud was a startup. There was 40 people when I got there. There's like 5,000 now. But it's about getting into that environment and being okay with chaos. Being okay with, actually, we don't have a good career program right now, but obviously like there's a lot of exciting things going on. There was no standard evaluation process in Oracle Cloud in the beginning. It was kind of on the whim and it changed every year, in which we used to do evaluations in March, then they went to July, and then they went back to March. And so understanding that the more chaotic, but the better the field, there's a lot of opportunity there. So don't be afraid of a really difficult challenge simply because it's great for growth. I hope that makes sense.
When I was hired with Microsoft, I just finished the tech academy in cloud server administration, and then I got hired into a role that didn't deal with servers pretty much at all, except for the occasional buzzword. And it was all growth constantly for a bit. So I also encourage you, don't tell yourself no. Like let somebody else tell you no, but like go for the thing. It like my job scared me on paper absolutely when I read the job description. I was like, why is it program manager 2? I'm not even a program manager 1. What in the world? And that 2 bothered me for a while, even after I was hired, because I was like, I'm not sure I could do the 1 version of this. So, but, like the growth was exponential and it was quick and it took a long time, but I was learning on day 1, and some of it was learning what not to say in meetings. But, you know, there's a lot of onboarding that you just learn professionalism and in various pieces of that. So, all right, we are drawing close to time. I want to be respectful of Tim's. I'm able to stay on a little bit longer. If anybody has specific questions or anything like that, then happy to hang out. But Tim, thank you for being here. This was so insightful. I loved it. So yes, thank you again also for stepping in last minute. I was just blown away at the power of LinkedIn this week on how quickly we had a guest that I had we weren't even connected at the time. So just thank you for that.
Well, Jacqueline, I'd like to close with, you are a product manager in a technology company. And although I am currently in the program management realm, I'm really looking at some point to pivot to the product management. And I'd love to set up a time to meet with you and talk a little bit about you and what you do with Microsoft and how maybe that can help, shed some light on the path I'm looking to go through. So Thank
It's
you
really
so much for having
interesting.
me.
Literally in the last couple of months, they have redefined, like we were all program managers and now we've split into technical PMs and product managers, but there are still some that are just program managers. So that'll be an interesting conversation because there's a lot of, we're still figuring that out too. But happy to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And thanks
All
so
right.
much for having me on. It was great talking with all you guys. Feel free to reach out and talk to me on LinkedIn. Ask any questions. I could stick around for a couple minutes too.
Yep, I will go ahead and stop the recording and we'll just go on for a little bit of like 1-to-1 mentoring or 10-on-1. That's how it looks. Thank you again.
See everyone next week. I'm going to jump into the meeting. All right, see you.